You can hire a man to stand beside you for one night, but you can't control what happens when he becomes the only person in the room who makes you feel safe. The ballroom of the Ashford Regency Hotel glowed like a jewel box under Manhattan's midnight skyline. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above marble floors polished so perfectly they reflected the soft gold light like water. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying champagne flutes and tiny silver trays of caviar, while the city's wealthiest names laughed too loudly beneath the music of a slow jazz quartet tucked beside the grand staircase. It was the kind of night where appearances mattered more than truth, and Vivian Sinclair understood appearances better than anyone in the room. "Your left hand," she said quietly as the black SUV rolled to the curb outside the gala entrance. "Keep it relaxed when photographers are around. It'll look more natural." Caleb Mercer glanced down at his rough hand resting beside his daughter's backpack. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "I spent 12 years in the Marines. I think I can survive a few cameras." Vivian looked at him for a second longer than she intended. Most men tried too hard around her. They puffed up their shoulders, changed their voices, acted rich before she even stepped out of the car. Caleb did none of that. He sat there in a charcoal suit that cost less than one of her handbags, broad shoulders relaxed, blue eyes steady beneath the soft glow from the dashboard. Beside him, 8-year-old Lily Mercer pressed her nose gently against the tinted window. "Daddy," she whispered, "that building looks like where princesses go when they get tired of castles." Caleb smiled faintly. "Maybe rich people just like shiny things, sweetheart." Vivian almost laughed before stopping herself. She wasn't supposed to enjoy this. The entire night had one purpose. Damian Cross would be inside waiting with his usual expensive grin and cruel little games. For 3 years he had treated love like a competition and people like chess pieces. Tonight Vivian intended to win for once. And Caleb Mercer, quiet single father from Brooklyn, was simply supposed to be part of the performance. The driver opened the door. Camera flashes exploded instantly across the sidewalk. Vivian stepped out first in a fitted crimson gown that wrapped elegantly around her tall frame, the silk catching every burst of white light. Reporters immediately surged toward her. "Vivian, over here. Miss Sinclair, is the merger finalized? Who's your date tonight?" Then Caleb stepped out holding Lily's hand. The noise changed. Not louder. Stranger. Curious. He wasn't polished like Manhattan executives. There was still something solid and working class about him, something unshaken beneath the tailored jacket and clean shave. But when he straightened to his full height beside Vivian, the photographers suddenly stopped shouting over each other. Even Damian's business partner standing near the entrance blinked in confusion. Caleb wasn't intimidating because he looked dangerous. He was intimidating because he looked impossible to embarrass. Lily adjusted the tiny silver hearing aid tucked behind her hair and stared up at the skyscrapers with wide eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, "everybody here looks exhausted." Vivian glanced down at the little girl. "What makes you say that?" Lily shrugged innocently. "They smile like they're practicing instead of feeling happy." For the first time that entire evening, Vivian Sinclair had no response. The jazz music drifted softly into the cold Manhattan air, as cameras continued flashing around them like tiny storms. Somewhere inside the ballroom, Damian Cross was waiting to watch her little performance unfold exactly as planned. But standing there beside Caleb Mercer under the city lights, Vivian suddenly felt something unfamiliar creeping beneath her carefully controlled confidence. Uncertainty. Because the quiet man beside her didn't feel like part of a script anymore. He felt like the kind of man who could accidentally change the ending. Before we continue, subscribe and turn on the notification bell if you enjoy stories like this. And honestly, who do you think is wrong here? Comment below. Now let's keep going. The ballroom doors opened slowly, and warmth spilled over them in waves of gold light, perfume, expensive whiskey, and the soft hum of conversations built on money and reputation. Vivian Sinclair walked forward with practiced elegance, every camera still chasing her movements even inside the gala hall. But tonight people were not only watching the billionaire chief executive officer in the crimson gown. They were watching the quiet man beside her. Caleb Mercer noticed it immediately. The subtle double takes, the narrowed eyes, the silent calculations from men in tailored tuxedos trying to decide whether he was old money, military, or something harder to classify. He kept one hand loosely at Lily's shoulder as they crossed the marble floor beneath the chandelier light. Rule number 1, Vivian said softly without looking at him. Do not disappear tonight. Caleb glanced toward her. That usually happens when people want something from me. Tonight they want information, she replied. There is a difference. A violin note floated gently above the jazz band while servers passed carrying crystal trays filled with miniature lobster rolls and smoked salmon tartlets. Across the room, investors laughed near towering glass windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan, their reflections blending with the city lights outside. Everything about the evening felt polished, controlled, curated. Caleb recognized environments like that, places where weakness was hidden beneath perfect smiles. Vivian slowed near the grand staircase and turned slightly toward him. Before Damien gets here, we need to review the rules. Her voice stayed calm, but there was tension behind it now. The kind people carried when they were preparing for emotional war. Caleb nodded once. All right. You stay close to me. Okay. No discussing politics. Easy enough. No talking about your military history unless someone asks directly. Caleb's expression barely changed. Fine by me. Vivian hesitated for a second before continuing. And no personal questions. That one made him pause. Meaning this arrangement works better if boundaries stay clear. Lily looked up between them holding a sparkling water with both hands. Are we spies? Vivian blinked in surprise before a small laugh escaped her despite herself. Something like that. Lily smiled proudly. Daddy would be good at that. He notices things nobody else notices. Caleb rubbed the back of his daughter's shoulder gently. Easy there, kiddo. But Vivian studied him differently now, because she had already noticed it too. The way he scanned exits automatically. The way he positioned Lily instinctively away from crowded paths. The way his calm never felt fake. Men in her world usually performed confidence loudly. Caleb carried his quietly, like something earned through pain instead of privilege. One more rule, Vivian added carefully. Do not break character in front of Damien. Caleb sipped the bourbon a waiter had handed him moments earlier. And what exactly is the character? Vivian met his eyes fully for the first time that night. The man I moved on with. For a moment neither of them spoke. The piano music drifted low through the ballroom while camera flashes occasionally burst near the entrance. Caleb finally gave a small nod. Understood. Then he added softly, but people are not scripts, Vivian. Her breath caught almost invisibly. Nobody called her Vivian in that tone anymore. Not gently. Not like her name belonged to a real person instead of magazine covers and billion-dollar headlines. Before she could answer, Lily tugged lightly on Vivian's sleeve. Miss Sinclair. Vivian looked down. Yes. Lily lowered her voice seriously. You look prettier when you forget to be careful. The words landed harder than any insult Damien Cross could have delivered. Vivian stared at the little girl while somewhere deep inside the ballroom, a familiar masculine laugh echoed near the entrance. Damien had arrived. Damien Cross entered the ballroom the way certain men entered every room in their lives, believing attention belonged to them before they even earned it. Conversations shifted subtly as he moved through the crowd in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, silver cufflinks catching the chandelier light while investors and board members greeted him with polished smiles. He looked expensive in the way Manhattan respected most. Controlled. Sharp. Dangerous without ever raising his voice. But the moment his eyes landed on Vivian, beside Caleb Mercer, something in his expression tightened almost invisibly. Well, Damien said smoothly as he approached them, this is unexpected. Vivian lifted her champagne glass with effortless elegance. Good evening, Damien. His eyes moved to Caleb slowly, measuring him. And who exactly is this? Before Vivian could answer, Lily stepped slightly closer to her father. That is my dad, she said proudly. Damien blinked once, caught off guard by the child's confidence. Then he smiled politely in the way powerful men smiled when they wanted to appear charming, while calculating every weakness in front of them. Of course, he said. I should have guessed. Caleb extended his hand calmly. Caleb Mercer. Damien shook it. The difference between them was immediate. Damien's grip carried performance. Caleb's carried stillness. Vivian never mentioned you, Damien said casually. That is probably because she enjoys surprising people, Caleb replied. A nearby executive quietly choked on his drink, trying not to laugh. Vivian turned her face slightly away to hide the sudden curve at the corner of her lips. Damien noticed that too. The jazz band transitioned into a slower piano melody, while servers refreshed drinks around the ballroom. Outside the massive windows, rain had begun streaking softly across the Manhattan skyline, turning the city lights into blurred rivers of gold and white. Damien slid one hand into his pocket. So what do you do, Caleb? Facilities management. Ah. Damien nodded slowly. Practical work. Caleb did not react to the subtle condescension buried inside the sentence. Somebody has to keep buildings standing. Vivian watched the exchange carefully now. Most men became defensive around Damien. They either tried too hard to impress him or shrank beneath his confidence. Caleb did neither. It unsettled Damien more than arrogance ever could. Lily looked up at Vivian again. Miss Sinclair. Yes. Is that the man who made you sad? The silence that followed was immediate and sharp. Even the pianist seemed quieter somehow. Damien gave a small uncomfortable laugh. Children really do say whatever comes to mind. Caleb rested a calm hand on Lily's shoulder. Easy, sweetheart. But Vivian could not look away from the little girl. Because the answer was yes. Damien had spent years turning affection into strategy, praise into leverage, and vulnerability into weakness. Standing there beneath the ballroom lights, Vivian suddenly realized something unsettling. Caleb Mercer had already seen through all of it within minutes. Damien recovered quickly, flashing his usual polished smile. Vivian, there are investors asking for you near the terrace. Then they can wait a moment, she replied coolly. That answer hit harder than she intended. Damien's jaw tightened briefly before smoothing over again. He studied Caleb one more time. Enjoy the evening, Mr. Mercer. Caleb nodded politely. You too. Damien walked away through the crowd, but the atmosphere he left behind lingered like static before a thunderstorm. Vivian exhaled slowly without realizing she had been holding tension in her chest. You handled that well, she admitted quietly. Caleb picked up a sparkling water for Lily from a passing tray. Handled what? Vivian stared at him in disbelief. Most people spend 5 minutes around Damien trying to prove something. Caleb crouched slightly beside his daughter, adjusting the sleeve of her tiny silver dress with gentle hands. People who know who they are usually do not feel the need to audition for respect. Vivian felt those words settle somewhere deep inside her like rain sinking into dry earth. And for the second time that night, the woman who controlled billion-dollar negotiations suddenly found herself unable to think of a single thing to say. Rain tapped softly against the towering glass windows, while the gala continued around them in waves of polished laughter and expensive conversation. Somewhere near the center stage, a famous jazz singer began performing an old Frank Sinatra standard, her voice smooth and low beneath the golden chandelier light. But Vivian Sinclair barely heard any of it anymore. Her attention kept drifting back toward Caleb Mercer. It unsettled her in ways she did not fully understand. He moved through the ballroom without trying to belong there, and somehow that made him stand out more than anyone else in the room. You are staring again, Caleb said quietly as he handed Lily another sparkling water. Vivian blinked. I do not stare. Ma'am, he replied calmly. You are a terrible liar. Lily giggled into her drink. Vivian narrowed her eyes at him, though there was no real irritation behind it now. You seem very comfortable for a man surrounded by billionaires. Caleb glanced around the ballroom slowly. Money only changes the size of the room. People are still people. Before Vivian could answer, a commotion near the eastern side of the ballroom shifted the atmosphere. A middle-aged investor wearing a velvet tuxedo jacket was cornering one of the younger waitresses beside the champagne tower. His voice was loud from too much whiskey, his smile careless and entitled, while the nervous young woman tried politely stepping away without causing a scene. Most guests noticed. Almost nobody reacted, because wealthy rooms often confused silence with sophistication. Vivian saw it too. Her jaw tightened slightly. Someone should help her, Lily whispered softly. Caleb had already started walking before the sentence fully left the little girl's mouth. Vivian watched him cross the ballroom floor with the same calm, steady pace he used for everything else. No aggression. No performance. Just quiet certainty. The investor laughed loudly as the waitress attempted to pull her wrist away. Then Caleb stopped beside them. "Sir," he said evenly, "I think the lady is trying to continue working." The man turned slowly, annoyance flashing across his flushed face. "And who exactly asked you?" Several nearby conversations softened immediately. People sensed tension the way animals sense storms. Caleb remained calm. Nobody had to ask. The investor scoffed. "This is a private conversation." Caleb glanced briefly toward the uncomfortable waitress before looking back at him. Respect usually works better when both people feel free to leave. Silence settled around the champagne tower. Not dramatic silence. Worse, the kind that forced people to suddenly hear themselves clearly. The investor released the waitress's wrist almost immediately, adjusting his jacket with awkward irritation. "Everybody is sensitive these days," he muttered before walking off toward the bar. The young waitress exhaled shakily. "Thank you." Caleb gave her a small nod. "You are doing fine." Then he simply walked away without waiting for praise. Vivian stared at him from across the ballroom, while something unfamiliar twisted quietly inside her chest. Most men in her world only stepped in when cameras were watching. Caleb had acted like kindness was instinct instead of strategy. Around them, conversations slowly resumed. Crystal glasses clinked softly. Piano music drifted through the room again. But the atmosphere had changed. Even Damian Cross, standing near the terrace with a group of investors, was watching Caleb now with narrowed eyes. Vivian felt Lily slip her small hand into hers unexpectedly. "Daddy does that a lot," the little girl whispered proudly. Vivian looked down. "Does what?" "Makes people quieter." The words landed softly, but they stayed there. 'Cause Lily was right. Caleb Mercer did not dominate rooms the way powerful men usually did. He did not raise his voice. He did not chase attention. And yet somehow every room became still the moment he decided someone deserved dignity. Vivian turned slowly toward him again as he adjusted the cuff of his suit near the ballroom window, Manhattan lights glowing behind his broad silhouette like scattered gold across the rain. For the first time in years, the powerful woman who controlled companies, headlines, and entire negotiations suddenly realized something dangerous. She was no longer pretending to be interested in the man beside her. The rain outside thickened into silver streams against the towering windows, while the gala drifted deeper into the night. Candlelight flickered across crystal centerpieces, jazz piano rolled softly through the ballroom, and the scent of expensive cologne mixed with warm butter and aged bourbon beneath the golden chandeliers. But despite the elegance surrounding her, Vivian Sinclair could feel the evening slipping away from her control one quiet moment at a time. It started subtly. Investors she normally commanded effortlessly were suddenly more interested in speaking with Caleb Mercer. Women near the terrace found reasons to smile at him. Older veterans attending the charity fundraiser nodded toward him with instinctive respect even before knowing his history. And most unsettling of all, Lily Mercer moved through the ballroom with innocent ease beside Vivian, as though the little girl belonged there more naturally than half the wealthy guests in attendance. Damian noticed everything. Of course he did. Men like Damian Cross survived by studying weaknesses in others. But tonight he could not find one in Caleb, and it was beginning to irritate him beneath his polished exterior. "Ladies and gentlemen," Damian announced suddenly near the center of the ballroom, lifting his glass with smooth confidence, "before the auction begins, I would like to thank Vivian Sinclair for continuing to support New York family charities despite her increasingly questionable taste in companionship." A wave of careful laughter moved through the crowd. Not genuine laughter. The kind wealthy people used to stay socially safe. Vivian's jaw tightened instantly. Caleb remained calm beside her, one hand resting lightly near Lily's shoulder. Damian smiled wider as he continued. "I admit Vivian always did enjoy surprises, though this one feels less like romance and more like community outreach." More laughter this time. Sharper. Several guests shifted uncomfortably while others glanced toward Caleb waiting for embarrassment, anger, or retreat. But Caleb only looked at Damian with the same quiet steadiness he had carried all evening. That calm unsettled people more than rage ever could. Damian took a sip of whiskey. "Tell me, Caleb, Is this your first charity gala? Or do you usually attend after fixing the plumbing? The room grew quieter now. Vivian felt humiliation rise hot in her chest, not for herself, but for the man standing beside her. She had invited him into this world as part of a petty emotional game. Now she suddenly hated watching that world try to diminish him. Caleb glanced briefly around the ballroom before answering. Actually, sir, I spent most of my life around people with very little. His voice remained low and calm. One thing I learned is that dignity usually costs less than a tuxedo. Silence. Complete silence. Somewhere near the stage, even the pianist stopped moving for half a breath. Damien's smile stiffened slightly. Caleb continued without changing tone. But it lasts a lot longer. Nobody laughed now. Several guests lowered their eyes into their drinks. A gray-haired senator near the auction tables quietly nodded to himself. Vivian stared at Caleb as something deep inside her shifted painfully, because he had just done something almost nobody in her world knew how to do anymore. He answered cruelty without becoming cruel himself. Damien gave a short forced chuckle. That is a very noble speech. Caleb shrugged lightly. Not really. Just practical. Lily tugged gently on her father's sleeve. Daddy. Yeah, sweetheart. I think rich people are scared of quiet people. A few nearby guests accidentally laughed for real this time. Not mocking laughter. Honest laughter breaking tension like sunlight through heavy clouds. Even Vivian felt herself smile before she could stop it. Damien looked around the ballroom and realized something terrible had happened. The room was no longer following him. Slowly, attention drifted back toward Caleb Mercer standing beneath the chandelier light with one hand in his pocket and calm blue eyes untouched by humiliation. And for the first time in years, Damien Cross looked like the least important man in the room. The ballroom never fully recovered after Caleb Mercer answered Damien Cross with quiet grace instead of humiliation. The energy shifted in subtle ways only emotionally intelligent people could feel. Conversations softened when Caleb walked past. Investors who had ignored him earlier now nodded respectfully. Even the servers smiled more easily around him. Meanwhile, Damien stood near the terrace windows nursing his whiskey with the rigid calm of a man unaccustomed to losing control of a room. Vivian Sinclair noticed all of it. And somehow that disturbed her more than the confrontation itself. Because this was never supposed to happen. Caleb was supposed to be temporary. A harmless role. A carefully selected man who could stand beside her long enough to irritate Damien before disappearing back into ordinary life. Instead, every passing minute made him feel more impossible to ignore. You are thinking too loudly again, Caleb said softly beside her. Vivian glanced toward him. Is that another military skill? No, his eyes drifted toward the rain streaking across the skyline beyond the glass. Just experience. The jazz band transitioned into a slower melody, smooth piano blending with muted trumpet beneath the chandelier glow. Couples slowly began moving toward the dance floor while candlelight flickered against polished marble and crystal glasses. Lily sat nearby at a small dessert table carefully eating a slice of chocolate cake, while watching the ballroom with wide observant eyes. I should warn you, Vivian said quietly. Damien hates losing attention. Caleb slipped one hand into his pocket. That sounds exhausting. Vivian unexpectedly laughed under her breath. It came out softer than she intended, almost unfamiliar to her own ears. Caleb looked toward her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. Not desire. Not calculation. Recognition. Like he suddenly saw the tired woman underneath the powerful image. Vivian felt warmth rise unexpectedly beneath her carefully controlled composure. She quickly looked away first. Miss Sinclair, Lily called gently from the table. Yes, sweetheart. Are rich people always this lonely? The question floated innocently through the soft jazz music. Vivian froze. Caleb glanced at his daughter with quiet amusement. Lily. I am serious, the little girl whispered. Everybody here looks beautiful and sad at the same time. Vivian slowly lowered her champagne glass. Nobody had ever described her world more accurately in fewer words. Before she could answer, the lead singer's voice drifted warmly across the ballroom microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, this next song is for anyone brave enough to risk their heart twice. A few guests applauded softly. Caleb looked toward Vivian. Would you like to dance? She blinked in surprise. That is not part of the arrangement. No, he agreed calmly. But standing still all night seems like a waste of good music. Vivian hesitated. For years she had danced with men who treated intimacy like performance. Men who held her waist while networking over her shoulder. Men who touched her beautifully without ever making her feel emotionally safe. But Caleb Mercer stood there offering nothing except sincerity. And somehow that felt far more dangerous. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and steady as he guided her gently onto the dance floor beneath the golden chandelier light. Around them the gala softened into blurred movement in candle glow while rain shimmered across Manhattan outside the windows. Caleb rested one respectful hand lightly against her back, while the slow jazz melody wrapped around them like smoke. Vivian expected awkwardness. Instead she found stillness. Real stillness. The kind that made her suddenly aware of her own heartbeat. You dance surprisingly well, she murmured. My wife used to say dancing was just another way of listening. Vivian looked up at him carefully. Used to. Caleb nodded once. Cancer. 6 years ago. The honesty in his voice carried no self-pity. Only quiet memory. Vivian felt something ache unexpectedly inside her chest. I am sorry. Caleb gave a faint smile. So am I. They continued moving slowly beneath the chandelier glow, while the city lights shimmered beyond the rain-soaked windows. And somewhere near the edge of the ballroom, Damian Cross watched them together with growing disbelief. Because for the first time all night, Vivian Sinclair was no longer pretending to enjoy the man beside her. The music slowed even further as Caleb Mercer and Vivian Sinclair moved quietly beneath the chandelier light, their reflections gliding across polished marble, while rain painted silver rivers down the towering ballroom windows. Around them the gala continued in elegant waves of conversation and champagne, but something deeper had settled over the evening now. The performance was beginning to dissolve. Vivian felt it every time Caleb looked at her without expectation. Every time he touched her waist gently enough to remind her that kindness still existed in the world. It frightened her. More than Damian ever had. You are quieter now, Caleb murmured. Vivian kept her eyes lowered briefly before answering. Most people around me only listen long enough to speak next. Caleb nodded slowly. That sounds lonely. The honesty in his voice almost hurt. Vivian inhaled carefully, catching traces of cedar cologne, candle wax, and rain drifting faintly through the ballroom air. She had spent years mastering negotiations worth billions of dollars. Yet standing here with a widowed father from Brooklyn somehow made her feel emotionally unprepared. Near the dessert table, Lily had fallen asleep curled gently in a velvet chair with her tiny silver hearing aid resting against one flushed cheek. Caleb noticed immediately. Excuse me a second. Vivian watched him cross the ballroom floor toward his daughter. The giant room softened around him somehow. He removed his suit jacket carefully and draped it over Lily without waking her, then brushed a loose strand of hair from her forehead with the kind of tenderness that could never be performed for attention. Several nearby guests quietly looked away afterward, almost embarrassed to witness something so genuine. Vivian felt her chest tighten unexpectedly. Damian saw it too. And this time his expression darkened openly. He crossed the ballroom toward them carrying a fresh whiskey glass while two younger investors followed behind him like nervous shadows. Remarkable, Damian said smoothly as Caleb returned beside Vivian. You really committed to the single father image. Vivian immediately stiffened. Caleb remained calm. Not an image. Damian gave a thin smile. Come on, Caleb. Nobody suddenly walks into Manhattan high society without wanting something. Caleb glanced toward sleeping Lily. You are right about one thing. Damian raised an eyebrow. Oh, I do want something. The nearby investors leaned slightly closer. Vivian felt tension quietly tighten through the air again like invisible wire. Caleb's voice remained low and steady. I want my daughter to grow up believing kindness matters more than status. Silence followed immediately. Damian laughed once beneath his breath, though there was less confidence in. And now, that sounds nice in theory. Caleb met his eyes evenly. It sounds necessary. One of the younger investors lowered his gaze into his drink. Another quietly stepped away altogether. Damian noticed the room shifting again. slipping from his control one conversation at a time. His jaw tightened slightly before he forced another polished smile. Tell me something, Vivian. Does he always sound like a motivational speaker? Or is tonight special? Vivian looked at Damien for a long moment. Then quietly, almost to herself, she answered, No, tonight is different. Damien blinked. Because she had not defended Caleb out of strategy. She had spoken like someone emotionally exposed. Before anyone could respond, a large screen near the auction stage suddenly flickered alive. The charity organizers were beginning a video presentation honoring military families and first responders across New York. Soft piano music filled the ballroom while photographs faded slowly across the giant screen. Then one image appeared that made several older guests straighten instantly. A younger version of Caleb Mercer wearing Marine Corps dress blues beside a rescue helicopter somewhere overseas. Vivian's breath caught softly. Damien stared at the screen in confusion. The announcer's voice echoed warmly through the ballroom speakers. Staff Sergeant Caleb Mercer received the Bronze Star for civilian rescue operations during severe flood evacuations overseas before returning home to raise his daughter after the loss of his wife. The room changed. Completely. Not loudly. Quietly. Respectfully. Like an entire ballroom suddenly realizing they had mistaken dignity for weakness all night long. Vivian slowly turned toward Caleb standing beside her beneath the chandelier light, while the rain shimmered against Manhattan outside the windows. But Caleb did not look proud. He looked almost uncomfortable with the attention, and somehow that made her heart ache even more. The ballroom remained unusually quiet even after the military tribute video faded from the giant screen. Soft piano music returned slowly, but the atmosphere had changed too deeply to recover into shallow conversation again. People looked at Caleb Mercer differently now. Not because he was suddenly powerful, but because they realized he never needed power to carry dignity in the first place. Caleb shifted slightly beside Vivian Sinclair, uncomfortable beneath the attention gathering around him. I should probably get Lily home soon, he said quietly. Vivian turned toward him almost too quickly. You are leaving? Caleb gave a faint smile. It is almost 11. School night tomorrow. The answer was so ordinary it made her chest ache unexpectedly. In her world, nights like this ended in penthouses, negotiations, and headlines. Caleb's world ended with homework, bedtime stories, and packed lunches before sunrise. Somehow that reality felt more meaningful than everything glittering around them. Before Vivian could respond, Damien Cross stepped forward again from near the auction stage, though the smooth confidence he wore earlier had begun to crack around the edges. Leaving already? He asked lightly. The night was just getting interesting. Caleb remained calm. Little girls usually matter more than parties. Several nearby guests glanced toward Damien immediately after that. Another quiet shift. Another invisible loss. Damien forced a chuckle. You really are good at this humble hero thing. Vivian's eyes hardened instantly. Enough, Damien. He turned toward her sharply. What exactly is happening here, Vivian? His voice stayed controlled, but years of entitlement simmered beneath it now. This was supposed to be some harmless little jealousy stunt. The words landed like shattered glass across the ballroom. Nearby conversations died immediately. Even the waiters slowed. Vivian felt heat rush painfully into her face. Caleb looked toward her slowly, not angry, not wounded, just quietly understanding. Somehow that hurt worse. Damien realized too late what he had exposed publicly, but frustration had already outrun his control. You brought him here to make me react, he continued bitterly. Now suddenly everybody acts like he is some kind of saint. Vivian's voice dropped low and cold. Stop talking. But Damien shook his head. No. I want to know when the performance became real. Silence swallowed the ballroom. Rain streaked softly across the windows while candlelight flickered against crystal glasses and polished marble. Caleb finally spoke. It never was real for me. Vivian looked at him sharply, pain flashing across her expression before she could hide it. Caleb's voice remained gentle. I agreed to help because she asked respectfully, and because my daughter's medical bills matter more than my pride. The honesty in the sentence hit the room harder than anger ever could. Damien laughed once under his breath, though now it sounded hollow. There it is. Money. Caleb met his gaze evenly. No, sir. He glanced toward sleeping Lily wrapped carefully inside his suit jacket nearby. Love. Complete silence followed. Vivian suddenly felt something inside her collapse quietly beneath the weight of her own choices. She had invited this man into her world as strategy. She had treated his kindness like a temporary convenience. Yet all evening Caleb Mercer had carried himself with more integrity than anyone in the ballroom, including her. Caleb stepped toward Lily's chair and gently lifted the sleeping little girl into his arms without waking her. The child rested her head naturally against his shoulder, while Manhattan lights shimmered across the rain-soaked windows behind them. Vivian watched the scene with painful stillness. It looked like peace. Real peace. Something money had never successfully purchased for her. Caleb adjusted Lily carefully before looking back toward Vivian one last time. Thank you for inviting us tonight. There was no bitterness in his voice. No accusation. Only grace. And that grace nearly broke her heart. Because at that exact moment Vivian Sinclair realized something terrifying. Somewhere between the fake smiles, slow dancing and chandelier light, she had stopped using Caleb Mercer to make another man jealous. She had simply started wanting him to stay. By the time Vivian Sinclair left the gala, Manhattan had dissolved into rain and midnight reflections. The city streets shimmered beneath yellow taxi lights while water rolled along the sidewalks in silver ribbons beneath the towering glass buildings. Inside the back seat of her waiting car, the silence felt unbearable. Her phone buzzed constantly beside her with messages from investors, board members, publicists, and Damien himself. She ignored every single one, because none of those voices were the one she could still hear in her mind. Little girls matter more than parties. The sentence lingered painfully in her chest as the car carried her uptown toward a penthouse overlooking Central Park. Normally the view comforted her. 40 floors above Manhattan, wrapped in glass and marble and designer furniture, Vivian had built a life people envied from magazine covers and financial interviews. But tonight the penthouse felt cold in a way she had never fully noticed before. The automatic lights glowed softly as she stepped inside. Silence greeted her immediately. No music. No laughter. No warmth. Just polished perfection echoing through empty rooms. Vivian removed her heels slowly and walked toward the giant windows overlooking the rain-soaked city. Somewhere out there, Caleb Mercer was probably carrying his sleeping daughter upstairs to a tiny apartment, reheating leftovers for tomorrow's lunch, checking homework folders before sunrise. And somehow that life suddenly felt richer than everything surrounding her. Her chest tightened unexpectedly. She realized with painful clarity that she did not miss the performance anymore. She missed the peace she felt standing beside him. Across Brooklyn, rain tapped softly against the windows of Caleb's modest apartment, while an old radiator hissed uneven warmth into the living room. The place was small but alive in quiet ways expensive homes rarely were. A child's sketchbook rested on the coffee table beside unopened mail. Tiny sneakers sat crooked near the couch. The scent of cinnamon tea drifted faintly through the air. Caleb carefully tucked Lily into bed, brushing her hair gently from her face as she stirred sleepily beneath dinosaur-patterned blankets. "Daddy," she whispered softly. "Yes, sweetheart." Miss Sinclair looked lonely. Caleb smiled faintly. "Get some sleep, kiddo." "I liked her," Lily mumbled before drifting back asleep. Caleb remained sitting beside the bed for a long moment afterward. Then quietly he stood and moved into the living room where rain painted soft shadows across the walls. His old Marine Corps jacket hung beside the door. Medical bills rested unopened near the kitchen counter. Life remained complicated. But for the first time in years, something inside him felt unsettled in a different way. Softer. Warmer. A knock at the apartment door interrupted the silence around midnight. Caleb frowned slightly before crossing the room and opening it. Vivian Sinclair stood there beneath the dim hallway light, hair damp from rain, crimson gown hidden beneath a long black coat. No photographers. No assistants. No luxury image. Just a woman looking emotionally exhausted. Caleb blinked once in surprise. "Vivian." She looked up at him quietly. "I did not know where else to go." The honesty in her voice landed gently between them. Caleb stepped aside immediately. "Come in before you freeze." Vivian entered slowly, taking in the apartment around her. The worn couch. The old piano near the window covered in family photographs. Lily's crayons scattered across the coffee table beside a half-finished school project about astronauts. Nothing matched perfectly. Nothing looked curated. And somehow it felt more comforting than her entire penthouse ever had. Caleb handed her a warm mug of tea. "It is not champagne," he said quietly. Vivian wrapped both hands around the mug like someone starved for warmth. "Good." Rain continued tapping softly against the windows, while the city hummed faintly in the distance beyond Brooklyn rooftops. Neither of them spoke for a while. They simply stood there inside the small apartment surrounded by ordinary life and quiet exhaustion. Finally, Vivian looked toward him with tired eyes that no longer carried billionaire confidence or carefully polished control. "I think I forgot how to be a real person somewhere along the way." Caleb leaned lightly against the kitchen counter. "Happens to a lot of people." Vivian laughed softly through tears she clearly had not planned to shed. "And what if I do not know how to fix it?" Caleb looked toward the hallway where Lily slept peacefully before answering in the same calm voice that had silenced an entire ballroom hours earlier. "Then maybe you stop trying to impress people who never really cared about you." The apartment fell quiet again after that. Deep quiet. Healing quiet. And standing there beneath the soft kitchen light while rain whispered against the windows, Vivian Sinclair finally understood something money could never buy. The safest feeling in the world was not power. It was being seen clearly by someone gentle enough not to use your broken pieces against you. In one unforgettable night filled with rain, jazz, and emotional twists, a powerful female CEO hires a struggling single father to make her wealthy ex jealous, only to discover a man whose quiet dignity changes everything. These touching stories reveal how kindness, respect, and emotional honesty can silence even the loudest room. As the successful businesswoman slowly lowers her guard, the devoted widowed father proves that true strength is not found in money or status, but in compassion and grace. Filled with heartfelt moments, elegant romance, and emotional healing, these touching stories explore loneliness, second chances, and the unexpected power of being truly seen. From luxury gala halls to a humble Brooklyn apartment, these touching stories deliver cinematic emotion and unforgettable dialogue. If you love emotional drama, healing romance, and inspiring character journeys, these touching stories will stay in your heart long after the final scene. Thanks for spending your time with us today. If this story meant something to you, don't forget to subscribe and support the channel. And I'm curious, how old are you? And did this story feel relatable to you? Let me know in the comments. Take care and see you next time.